Thank you. Yeah, big just shouts out to Trent and Pam, first of all, MarigoldONE11. Obviously, this isn't possible without them. Also, shouts out to Elevator Nezzy. Thank you for helping us get this set up, Josh, everybody else at Elevator. This is an awesome thing that's happening, just bringing Omaha together, helping out the community. So appreciate that. And then just a little bit about me before we get started. My name's Chris, and then I run a Google Ads agency. And so that's different from Google Analytics. They're both closely intertwined. We're going to talk about both today. But with Google Ads, the part of the magic is it can connect your marketing to your sales or to your online donations or to whatever's going on your site. And so as an advertiser, I just kind of had to learn all the technical stuff. And then after doing this for a few years, it's like, oh, I'm pretty good at Google Analytics. And then all of a sudden, there are these changes. And so I was talking with Pam and Trent, and we're like, hey, we need to talk about this. And so just really grateful for you guys to care about this and give me this platform. Essentially, what's going on right now in Google Analytics is they're getting rid of all the old data and forcing everybody to upgrade to the new version called Google Analytics 4. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And before we really get into the nitty-gritty part, I want to just open with kind of the big picture. Then we'll go talk about what is Google Analytics, how to save the old data, and then how to capture the new data moving forward. And so just kind of the big picture is the idea of like data-driven advertising, data-driven marketing, data-driven just decision-making. And so obviously being an advertising guy, that's kind of how I see the whole world. But really, Google Analytics can kind of apply to any website. And so this material, anyone who has a website or just kind of wants to learn more about the whole online advertising world or just online world, this is kind of a great little thing to know how to do, because everything's data driven anymore. And what I wanted to get across with this slide is kind of a lot of like Tolstoy, he has this quote, he goes, all happy families are the same, but all unhappy families are unique in their own way. And I think that's really similar with like websites. And so like all the good websites are kind of using data, they're looking at their data, they're using it to make improvements, where all the bad websites probably are not collecting data at all, and then they're not really doing anything with it, even if they are. And so this is one of my favorite, like big picture. And then the next slide is this is kind of my go-to. I was telling people this talk is a lot based off of some talks I did earlier with like Chamber of Commerce and Do Space. And this slide was actually at the end, but it was my favorite, so I thought I needed to get it at the start. And this is like a little quiz. And so don't answer out loud, but just in your mind, you got to think, if you were the advertising person for this company, and at the end of the month, they bring you the report, and they say, okay, what's our best and worst form of marketing? What should we be doing more of? And what should we be doing less of? And so just think in your mind. And then a lot of people would say, oh, probably search engines, because that brought us the most traffic. But obviously there's a big gap in this slide. And so once you get a little more data, it's like, oh, okay, search engines are good, but our social media actually is doing pretty well too in terms of getting free trials. Or then once you look at the e-commerce transaction data, it's like, holy cow, the paid ads that we thought were the worst different percentage-wise may have been the best form of marketing for us. And just one of the things I want to get across in this slide is different forms of marketing work for different people. These numbers are all half made up, but based off of real websites. And so just the more data you have, the better decisions you're going to make. And so in that last slide, I was talking about, if you don't have any data, your decision, you'll probably just end up doing the same thing over and over and over. But once you can actually see, like, hey, kind of what we thought would work, maybe did, but with this thing we didn't think would work, actually is doing great. And so it's not so much like you deciding, but letting the market decide. And so that's one thing I think is really cool about just this whole like data-driven kind of mindset. And so we haven't even got into Google Analytics yet, but Google Analytics is the thing that really makes the magic happen. And this is what I'm going to be talking about today. And I want to just kind of show the history of this whole product, because I'm a big believer in like evolution of things. And, you know, if you study the past, you're going to understand the future and the future trends. And just high level, Google Analytics, what it is, it's collects information on people's websites. Then the whole point, in my opinion, is to connect marketing to sales, right? And so in that slide we just did, okay, if you don't have the data, your marketing's never going to be good. But also it can really be used to, like, for someone who's doing a website and just kind of wants to hold their own people accountable, or see kind of their own flaws, see which pages, which blogs are the most interesting. It can do all that, but what I found is it's really used mainly by marketing and advertising people. And just a little bit of the history is Google didn't invent Google Analytics also. They purchased it from this other company called Urchin. And I never knew this for the longest time. And in a way, I didn't think it was so interesting. But then when I heard the story of like why they bought it, it's like, oh, okay, that is kind of interesting. And what happened is Google obviously makes all their money from Google ads and advertising through their search engine. And they found out that basically all their customers were using this product called Urchin Analytics to decide if the Google ads was actually worth it or not. And so all of a sudden, Google got a little uncomfortable with this, because like the success of their own product was based off of this other product called Urchin. And then at the time, there were a lot of kind of tracking platforms. One thing about Urchin was it was free to get started with, and then they would upsell people because it's complicated to get these things set up. And so Google purchased Urchin and they relaunched it as Google Analytics, or now what's like revisionist history known as Classic Analytics. And when they launched Google Analytics, like it was one of the most popular launches of all time. And like they literally could not support it. They had way too many people sign up. And so just like literally from the get-go, Google Analytics was by far the most popular web service. Because one thing Google could do is they kind of could fund the whole thing with their advertising dollars. And I just want to like hit on this point because it's going to come around at the end. But no, so they launched Google Analytics 2006. And then for the longest time, the motto was set it and forget it. Just set it up once. You don't really need to worry about it. I would say you really need to set it up right. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just the mindset is, just do it once right and then forget about it, and you'll be fine moving forward. And for the longest time, this was a fine way of thinking. But then all of a sudden, there's some huge changes. And hit the next one. And so what's going on now is Google is doing another upgrade. And there's been a lot of upgrades in the past, like around 2012. They moved everybody from Classic Analytics to it's now known as Universal Analytics. And when this happened, it was just like, I remember I was at my office one day and it was like, oh, all of a sudden Google Analytics looks different, but all my data's there. And so I didn't really think twice about it. But now with this new upgrade, the catch is you can't move your old data to the new Google Analytics 4. And so the rub is a lot of people have there's some people have 20 years of data on their website and it's just gonna kind of go away. And then specifically what's going on is in July, all of these older accounts are just gonna stop working. So you'll still have access to them. But then at an undisclosed date, sometime 6 months after that, so sometime in 2024, all these old accounts are just going to be no longer available. And I did the no longer available in quotes because one thing I think is really interesting about this, and because I follow this whole thing really close, is Google never said they're deleting the data. It's just like no longer available to the people who set it up. And so that's a little beside the main point of this talk, but I think that's really interesting and wanted to put that in here. But yeah, the whole like kind of like it or not, what's going on is everybody needs to set up Google Analytics 4 moving forward to track their website. And then with this old data, like it's kind of, I mean, there's a big problem now because if you want to compare what's going on with your site now to last year or the year before, that's just not really going to be an option. The other thing worth noting is Google Analytics 4, it only keeps your data for 14 months. I'll talk a little bit about this more in a second, but like there's, when I was saying earlier, there's this new era of analytics, I think this was kind of what I meant. It's like all the old data, not only is it not really going to be compatible moving forward, but people aren't even going to have access to it anymore. And so what I think is going to happen is there'll be a lot of marketing people, website people, we're going to go log into their account one day and it's just going to kind of not be there. And it'll be this thing, man, I swear I set this up, but I don't know. And so one of the reasons I want to do this talk is just a little like public service announcement almost. And so there's some big changes. Before I go on to the next slide, does anyone have any questions about the history of this whole thing? No?
I mean, just on that, Chris, I mean, one of the things I think it's important for people to is that if you have a website that's been up, it's your data, right? So, and from a custody standpoint, you want to keep custody of your data. I mean, like what a lot of the groups are talking about with this like kind of obscure language he's using, it's not really going away. Just have access to it. Is like Google's really going to take custody of your data. So before that happens, you have the opportunity to download that data and hold that data. Depending on how much you rely on it, that could be really important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then I would almost like differ a little bit because people don't really own their data. I always said that same thing too. Like, if you set up Google Analytics, you're keeping your own version of the data. But as soon as they say, oh no, we're kind of having it all disappear, it's really Google who owns your data. However, you can export your data to a spreadsheet, which we'll talk about next. One other thing too, Trent, you reminded me of this, but I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but moving forward, there actually are a lot of alternatives anymore. Kind of every website has their own tracking platform. But for the longest time, from like 2006 up, it's like Google Analytics pretty much was the only website tracking platform. And so it's something like 75% of websites on the internet use Google Analytics. Some of them have 20 or like 18 years of data going back. And so this whole thing with the data disappearing, like this is a big deal. And it's a little, Google is a little vague on what's going on. They always talk about how you can migrate the data or you migrate your old account to the new account. However, that doesn't mean you store your data. That just means we'll set up your new Google Analytics 4 for you. And so let's go to the next slide. And so, Trent, you kind of set me up for this one with owning your own data. And I was like, not quite. In my opinion, if you really want to own your data, you got to do this thing called export your data. And then what this looks like is you'll have a giant spreadsheet, and which kind of has a new problem in itself, because now that you have a giant spreadsheet, like, okay, how do I make any sense of this? And so what you got to do is then connect your spreadsheet to some sort of report. And this is my own little dashboards I have. And once you connect it to your report, the next step is you'll have to set this thing up because every website is kind of unique. And so depending on how you have your Google Analytics set up, you're going to have to customize your dashboards. But one thing I want to get across with this is it's not the simplest process ever. A lot of people think, Google should make it really easy to do this thing, but It's a little bit trickier than you'd think. And so I have a little dashboard that helps people save their data, and I'll show you that at the end. But yeah, the whole process is not only do you gotta download it to a spreadsheet, but then it's like, okay, we have a new problem. What do we do with the spreadsheet? You really gotta connect it back to Google Analytics. And so go to our next slide. And so how it actually works, this is a little bit technical, and I want to kind of have this high level. But by the way, even before I go into this, the way Google Analytics works is very similar to how Facebook ads works or any sort of ad platforms. And so even if you don't use Google Analytics, like these 4 things I'm about to talk about really apply to almost all online tools. And hit the next slide. So to get analytics set up on your site, you really have to install these tags or pieces of code on your website. This is something that like the average user would never know. They don't see it. It's all kind of on the back end. Whenever I talk about tags, I use the word sensors. Like you got to put a little sensor on each page. Then the sensors all talk to each other. They can see, okay, they started here, they went here, they dropped off there, maybe they ended up buying. But yeah, the first step is get the tags. That's pretty easy to do. And then the next step of getting it set up is you have to actually configure it a little bit. And so in my opening slide, I had the quiz where, the company was missing half the data. That's extremely common. And how you set it up wrong would be to mess up the tags or to have your tags, but then never actually tell it, hey, here's what I want to track. So it's specifically like, here's my purchases or here's my like donations. And so a lot of people are like, our whole goal is to get donations to our website, but then we never actually set it up right. And so just I really believe, because I've looked at a lot of these websites and a lot of the people analytics, is I always assumed everyone was set up right, but almost like 4 out of 5 are not set up right. And then that makes it hard for the marketers and everything. And so, yeah, once you get the tags and the tags, collect the data, the configuration, how does the whole data work together? Then it stores it in this big database, which is like a big spreadsheet. And so in the past slide, I was saying you got to download your database to your own spreadsheet, and then you can't reconnect it to the dashboard. So you have to have your own dashboard moving forward. And so it's a lot of work. Obviously, a lot of people don't like this, but what's even worse is losing all your data. Yeah, and so Looker Studio, that's actually what I use. But then Looker Studio is kind of separate from the actual reports. And so if you want to store your data for more than 14 months, you really need to set up and store your data in something called like BigQuery, or it's BigQuery. It's called the cloud platform. It's just like I think of it as a giant like spreadsheet. And Google makes it pretty easy to store your new data somewhere else. But then you kind of have the same problem because you can't connect. If you do choose to export your data somewhere else, you cannot move it back and visualize it in Google Analytics 4. And so there really is a need, in my opinion, for some sort of like alternative reporting system. But like, yeah, this isn't like the best publicized thing. And so people are still kind of waking up to this. But yeah, no reconnecting your data stored. And so, yeah, in the past it was, just set up your tags, configure it right. We'll essentially store your data forever. And then we'll make it really easy for you to see what's going on. In the future, not only are we not going to store your data, you got to send it somewhere else, but then you're also going to have to make sense of it yourself too. And any questions before we go to the next one? Yeah.
Almost 14. Well, they're right off the site. It's like
Well, what's data do I? It's very cool. It's that interesting. It's like Mark has. It's got.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. And then I didn't have a slide on this, but I did want to talk about like the old version versus the new version and what are the differences. And so if you, yeah, like right now, a lot of people have kind of the old version and the new version running on their site. It is interesting how they don't all add up. This is a little bit more technical, but the old version used this thing called cookies to track people. I always think of cookies as just like it's like a 30-digit like word with numbers and random characters. Anyways, moving forward, that's not how it works. And it's like essentially it's a lot more complicated. Like cookies were already kind of complicated in my opinion, and now it's even more complicated. Part of it is Google is using like they can see if someone is logged in with their Google account, and they can see what devices the people are on. The other thing that is really interesting between the old version and the new version is with the old version, you can never change your data. And so you had to put it in the database. That was good and bad. The bad part was a lot of people never have their stuff set up right. And so as soon as, oh, dang it, we're not keeping track of our sales. Can we go in and bring in our old sales data and change the data? You can never change it. One thing that's really interesting about the new version is Google can change your old data. And so like as an advertiser, it took me a while to figure this out, but like, yeah, I don't know 100% how that works with the cookies, but just that's something really interesting to know. And then, yeah, even the number of like people that visit your websites aren't the same. And that's just due to this whole thing with cookies, like no longer being allowed. And the other thing is in Europe, there's a lot of legislation going on, and Google Analytics might even like become illegal to use with this cookie thing. And that's a little bit outside the scope of the talk, but I think that's one of the big reasons why a lot of these changes are happening. All of a sudden, Google, we don't want to save your data because they're getting sued. And so, okay, you're in charge of, you can keep your own data forever, but you have to take full liability for it. And so,
Developer here, it's still.
yeah,
So that's it.
yeah. Yeah, and then something else is with the cookies, it just kind of could tell for the longest time. And then moving forward, it might not be as good. And then a lot of people are thinking like, okay, I might not use Google Analytics. I might use something else. Like these changes are going to affect every single platform. And so obviously I'm talking about Google Analytics, but yeah, I think there'll be just moving forward, it might be the advertisers get less data. And so that's just something, like it or not, you kind of have to deal with it. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay. So alternatives, one thing is I've always been the biggest Google Analytics advocate. Like, you got to do Google Analytics. Even if you have a lot of website platforms have their own built-in analytics software. My mindset was, okay, well, it's free, do both, compare them against each other. If something doesn't add up, that's something's going on. Like everything should be matching up. And so, hey, why not just set it up? It's easy enough. Moving forward, though, I don't even know if that really is the best option for most websites. Because a lot of, like if you have a WordPress website, they'll track everything. If you have a Shopify website, same deal, they'll track everything. And so I have my 4 options here. First one is just use what I call the basic Google Analytics 4. So it's free. Then the other one would be, okay, you can do kind of a custom setup. That's free, but then you got to pay someone to go into your site and link everything up, which can get a little expensive. But then there are a lot of alternatives now, and I don't know all of them just because I use Google Analytics, but for the most part, they're not free. and it's a deal where you got to pay a small amount per month, but there are like, it'll keep all your data moving forward. And then, yeah, built-in analytics, that just means if you have your own like WordPress or WordPress, Shopify site, you could use those. So that's your other option. And honestly, for a lot of people, that might be the best way to go. But then something else, if you do choose that route, is we were talking about earlier about like, do you own your data or not? And I always told people, it's like, if you have Google Analytics, you own your data. That's not really true. And so if you set it up to where you store it in something like BigQuery, you actually do own it. And I think another way to think about if you own it or not is like, could it just like disappear the next day? Because I never thought that could, but now that all these changes are happening, it's like, if it can disappear, you don't own it. And so this whole deal of having to save it to a spreadsheet or save it to a BigQuery cloud is really what people should be doing. And then, yeah, any questions on this one? Michael.
I struggle as a business owner with owning my data as far as analytics, and it's either Squarespace or now it's TownSquare and Active. They own everything where I can look at. But I'm just asking, like, how do you communicate to the, or can you communicate to the website provider? Like, I would like my data back.
Yeah.
Tax purposes, of course, or other things.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And so what your options are, first of all, I would use Google Analytics and Squarespace. Because one thing you could do is set up your Google Analytics where it saves. The other thing, if you use something like Squarespace, there always are options to export your data. One thing I wanted to try to get across in those earlier slides is that's a little bit trickier than you'd think, just exporting in the first place. And then if you do export it, it's like, okay, I just have this giant spreadsheet. Because ultimately what people want is like, hey, like, how am I doing this year versus last year? To really like make calls like that, you got to simplify the whole spreadsheet. And so, yeah, what I would say for someone is like, okay, if you want to own your data, you do Squarespace or something like that. Yeah, I would set up Google Analytics, and then you can have it to where it saves all your data in BigQuery. So you're saving it with Google Analytics. Then you're also saving it with your own website platform. And that's actually a little bit overkill doing the two, but like, it's just one of these things, you know, you set it up once and it'll keep on moving forward. And so,
Let's see, have a provider for a platform saving your data, but then they're like, we can only release your data.
you can still do that, but this whole thing is just a little bit trickier than it seems. And so, yeah, let's go to the next slide. And so, yeah, this is my last one. And so just kind of to summarize everything, and I wanted to really keep this high level. If anyone has specific questions on like, oh, how do I set this up? How do I do that? Obviously, very happy to answer them. But just the key things I wanted to get across is, okay, this first question, am I about to lose the whole history of my website? And if you have this old version called Universal Analytics, and if anyone has questions, I can kind of help you. Essentially, if it was like set up before the year 2000, you probably have this old version, and if it's after, you probably have the new version. But like, if you do if you have the old version, you are about to lose a lot of your data. And so what you really need to do is export it. Trying if you want to hit so if yes, export your data. And so the next thing is, okay, am I capturing my website data moving forward? And so if you have Google Analytics, one thing Google is doing is kind of automatically setting up Google Analytics for new websites. And so this is cool. I am a big fan of this. However, earlier we were talking about once you set this thing up, you have to configure it a little bit so it can actually see, oh, this website is like an online store. They want to keep track of sales. If you have this automatic update, it's probably not going to keep track of all your sales. It'll just give you the basic level of tracking. And so, like, you need to set up Google Analytics, and then you also really need to take a deep look at it. Okay, is this actually saving all the same stuff my old website was? And then number 3, this is a little bit outside the scope of like the old data going away and the new data going, or setting up the new data, but just like 4 out of 5 analytics accounts I look at, it's just like that quiz I showed you in the beginning. I can see my traffic. I have no idea who signed up. Like, I know I got so many sales or so many new leads. I really have no idea like where they came from. And again, in my opinion, that's the whole point of Google Analytics, is really to connect all these things, help people make like marketing decisions. And so if you're not tracking conversion data, you just like, first thing you need to do, what do I need to capture? And then they have some like little tutorials on that, or sometimes it's a little bit tricky to set up, but just the point is, if you just set up the basics, you're going to be missing a lot of this key information. And so if you're setting up this new version, you really got to think, what are the specific things I want to capture? And then my 4th point is more to Google Ads. And I didn't talk a lot about Google Ads, but one of the things that's really cool about Google Ads or Facebook Ads is how it works is it'll see where you spend your money, and it can also see if that spend actually led to new sales. Of course, that requires you have all this tracking set up. But one of the rubs is that a lot of advertisers, kind of Google Ads, how it worked in the past is you had to have Google Analytics set up. Otherwise, it can never see your sales. And so one of the consequences is a lot of advertisers' accounts that might be running great now, all of a sudden could get completely messed up. And this is not an exaggeration, because the whole thing is, okay, we're going to compare our ads, or we're going to compare our 5 audiences. We're going to tell you the very best ones, and then we'll spend your money accordingly. By the way, that's exactly what I do with my agency. All kind of Google Ads, Facebook Ads have some sort of variation of the same message. But the whole thing is, if you don't have your whole tracking set up, right, like that's a recipe for disaster with the Facebook ads. And so, yeah, I think I said this earlier, but in my opinion, the only people that like really care about analytics, everybody says, oh, we like data, we're data driven. The only people that really care are these big ad spenders, because they want to know like, hey, Chris, am I wasting money or not? And it's like, okay, to answer that, you really need to have all this other stuff set up. But then, yeah, like with Google Ads in the beginning, it never was totally automated. It was just, oh, it's smart to set this up. Because like, remember, Google only bought this whole Google Analytics because all of their advertisers were using it to decide if it was worth it or not. And then along the way, they set up this automation where once you get it set up, we'll actually do it all for you. So this is sort of an aside, but it kind of freaks me out a little bit as an ad manager, because it's like my job will be 100% automated moving forward. However, in the meantime, it's like, I think there's going to be a big need for it, because there's a lot of people. So let's see, if it ends in July, it'll probably be like 2 months after. And it's like, hey, our website where our ads were doing great, but now something changed. We have no idea what it was. And this is a little, well, it's not too technical, but earlier I was talking about the tags or the sensors. And so if you are a person that does Google Ads, Facebook Ads, any of that, what you really want to do is not rely on Google Analytics anymore. So you don't use these Google Analytics sensors. You kind of need to use your Facebook pixels, which is the same thing as a sensor or a tag, or like the Microsoft Universal Event Tag, I think is what it's called. Every company has its own version of it, but it's all the same thing. And so, yeah, if you're advertising and you don't want your whole thing to get messed up, you really need to take a long look. And then like actually getting these things set up is a little more of a hassle, but I think people just don't really know like the high level of what's going on. And yeah, no, I think there's something kind of strange about the whole data getting deleted. Like if I could talk to Google, I would love to know, like, why can't we just keep our old data? Because they say, I get kind of why you can't move your new data over. It really is a lot different. Google Analytics was built 20 years ago. It's like the web. A lot of that stuff was just a lot different. And so, okay, that's fair. We got to do this new version, but like, why can't we just keep the old data? Like it or not, you can. And so, yeah, if you are about to lose your, if you're going to lose your old data, save it. And then you really got to set up this new version moving forward. And then, yeah, a lot of people, once they set it up, I put my tags on the sites, I'm good to go. Really, that's pretty good. That's a lot better than not tracking anything at all. But again, like 4 out of 5 websites or analytics accounts are not set up right. They're not tracking the sales. And for a lot of people, it's like not that big of a deal. Even if you did have this conversion data, you probably never would have done anything different, except if you're one of these advertisers that has these platforms that like makes these smart decisions. Because then all of a sudden, like losing all this data, losing your tags, it will immediately like change the decision. So like, yeah, even if you have it set up, you wouldn't have done anything different. With this is like, if you don't have it set up, you're going to be spending way different. And it's like, not only are your audiences going to be different, but literally like it'll show different messages to those people. Because it'll just be like, get an idea. It's like optimization, like what should we optimize for? And if it has no idea what to optimize for, it's never really going to know who's our true best customer, what is our true best message. And so again, that's kind of in the whole advertising realm. But the thing that really binds it all together is Google Analytics. And so, yeah, what questions do you guys have? Michael.
Is there a resource for like specific tags, or is it like to that tag product and it's trying to track it? But is that like what's the difference between a tag and a hashtag?
Yeah, okay. Completely different things. Hashtag, I honestly don't even, that's like something that exists on Twitter to help organize information. A tag in this sense is actually like a line of code of JavaScript that you put on your backend site. And then what was your question? The other part of that one?
So it's like, how to utilize?
Oh, the tags.
So the difference between tags. I operate with hashtags, Facebook posts, and then I Google search that word, and my post is the only thing that populates with a hashtag that. So it's another way of searching, because it's really difficult to find old posts on Facebook.
Yeah.
So hashtags have helped me just locate all across time.
Yeah, so just these are really completely different things. And also the word tag is not a universal word. Like Facebook, for example, has their version, they call it the Facebook Pixel, which I don't know, I think that's weird because Pixel is like something on your screen. But yeah, if you do Facebook advertising, you want to have those hashtags in your posts, but then you want to use what's called the Facebook Pixel on your site. And how you do that is just once you create an account on Facebook, an advertising account, they'll like automatically produce your pixel for you, or your tracking tag for you. Each one is unique. And so you got to get your own unique tag or pixel. And yeah, that's really different from a hashtag. A lot of this stuff is so confusing. That's why I like the word censor. It's like you got to put your Facebook censor on your page. Because you got to tag like just so many, like even the word cookies, like I think is so ridiculous. It's like, it's not a cookie, just call it like a 30-digit number. But that was one of the hardest parts of me of learning this thing, was just like everything, every platform has a different name for everything. And so, a tag is a lot different from a hashtag. And then, yeah.
Just I realized that so you've had 18 years, things do. And it, but funny you is it's a lot of data.
That's a good question. And so the first thing I would say is you want to capture the basics, like how many people are actually coming to my site, because it's true the web's changed a lot from then to now, but like the basics of like how many people are on my site, that still matters. That's still something that's sort of interesting to compare along the time. And then the other question you asked was like, I interpreted as like, oh, what data should we like not collecting? And so one of the things with Google Analytics 4 is it allows advertisers, allows websites to actually collect a lot more information on people. And one of the things that's going on right now in Europe is they have this new law. It's called the GDPR. And essentially it says that websites can't collect individualized information on people. And so what I mean by that is with the old version of Google Analytics, it's really set up to make it hard to like know. It's like, hey, Michael came to your site from Omaha on this day. You just see, hey, you had someone from Omaha on a cell phone this day. You never really know who it is. With this new version of analytics, if you really configure it and customize it, you can really see like, oh, this was actually, if someone puts in their email, you can have like individual information on people and like, oh, what pages did they look at? What do they download? And so one of the things you got me thinking about is having that information and collecting that could actually open people up to a lot of liabilities. Not so much in Omaha, because none of that stuff applies here, but I think it's really interesting because one of the Google's big pushes right now is privacy. Like, oh, privacy is the most important thing to us. But at the same time, they're making it easier for advertisers to collect more information. And so, like, my mindset is like, oh, you want to collect everything possible. Like, oh, if you can get information on people, why not? But then it's like, you really want to be careful doing that. If you're in Omaha, it's not the biggest deal, but just the rule of thumb is you don't want to have like individualized information on people. And then the other thing is like, as an advertiser, I don't really, even if I knew it's like, oh, Michael came to my site on this day on this device, it's like, that's cool, but it's like, I'm really looking for like the big trends. Like, okay, oftentimes it'll be something like, for whatever reason, people on cell phones never end up buying your product, but then people on desktop do. And so once you know that, it's like, okay, well, let's adjust our ads so we spend all our money on desktop. That's really the information that you want to be collecting. Or something else would be like, all the people from Facebook never signed up for something for some reason, but all your email traffic did. That's the information I think is most important to collect, because then it's like, if you are doing marketing or emails, it's like, okay, I know it was good back then. Why is it not moving forward? And so that's kind of a long-winded answer, but then just like what information we collect. You really don't want like the individual information. You want the big picture information. And then like that's obvious, but then there also is this other step where it's like, you got to be really careful if you collect information on people. And I think that the whole GDPR is actually a great thing. Like, it is kind of, I get freaked out a little bit the more I like dig into this thing. Oh, how like Google does know so much about people. And so like, yeah, even the people that are making the most data-driven decisions, they're not looking at the individual person, they're looking at the big picture. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer, but just avoid collecting like individual information on people. And so I bring that up too, because I think it's interesting, this whole thing, oh, privacy is the most important part, but also we're making it so much easier to collect like individual information. And so with like, there are some, I was not the biggest fan initially of Google Analytics 4 just because it was hard to set up. But now that I come around to it, actually is really cool. Like, oh, you can collect so much different stuff, but like, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And yeah, I would anticipate there'll probably be, I know in California, there's some new laws happening right now. I forget the acronym they use, but it's the same deal. Because then like a lot of websites will have this thing like, oh, do you want to allow cookies on our site? And so if people don't collect yes, they're not supposed to do that. And like, if you're in Omaha, you really don't need to do something like that. But you could like, in theory, like get sued by the state of California if you have a lot of visitors from there. I really want it, like, I'm not a lawyer, but like, I don't think that's the biggest thing for like new websites. Like, if they're going to prosecute anyone, it should be the bigger sites, but just that's kind of the next thing down the road. And so that's also a reason why a lot of these tracking platforms like aren't going to be as good moving forward. Because if people say, hey, don't track me, guess what? All your ad data is never going to be as good. And so, yeah, a lot of changes going on with this.